12 of the drama Llamas. I'm Doug Urbanski.
And I'm Stephen Jeffries. So, this is the dozenth episode. And if that's not a word, it is now. Deal with it.
A veritable baker's dozen minus one.
Ah. Why didn't you just say dozen? So, today we're talking about a little trio that Agri brings to us in Chapter 10 of Art of Dramatic Writing. And that's a surprise, because, you know, it's like the only thing we've talked about. Minus Strindenberg, I suppose.
Strindenberg.
That guy with the savagely short plays. We're talking today about crisis, climax, and resolution. Feel free to fill in your own dirty jokes mentally. I'm sure they'll happen regardless of whether we make them or not. So, the first thing that I would like to talk about is going to wait, because I'm going to, as I always do, ask you, what did you think about this, Doug?
Well, this almighty trifecta here, the crisis, climax, resolution triangle. I thought it was interesting that it's something that happens more than once in a play. It's like a smaller structure that we see just happen over and over in a play. I think often we're kind of, and I think this comes just from when we're younger and learning all about story building and making a story. The idea of the climax being just this one moment in the story that everything just hits to the top and just after that everything comes down in the falling action.
But these three things do happen many times throughout a play, and they're affected not just by the actual action itself, but by characters too.
Right.
They talk about how on page, I believe it's 238, this unbreakable bond between the parties will ensure rising conflict, crisis, and climax. Talking about diametrically opposed characters, going back to the idea of unity of opposites, and showing how that if you play your cards carefully, that this will be a natural extension of those growths that you see within the character and the plot and all that jazz. So something that I thought was interesting that I wanted to bring up is the example that they use about the man dropping a cigarette in his bed, lighting on fire. The basic gist of it is an example play is given in which a man burns to death, or doesn't, and he discusses the point at which the sheets catch on fire and begin to burn as not the climax, but the crisis, right. This crisis moment, and he gives the example that the man could wake up and run out, or the man could burn to death and suffocate. And I think it's interesting because I don't know about you, but I would have envisioned that scenario as the climax, not the crisis. And even though the two are similar, they're not the same. What do you think about that?
It does seem pretty climactic. But I'm pulling in some stuff here from another class that I'm in, the 20th Century Lit class I'm taking with Dr. Ames about literature after 9/11. And one of the theory essays we read was on television and crisis. And the author went heavily into just what makes a crisis. And interestingly enough, the author went into the etymology, is that?
I think so.
Yeah. The etymology of the word. And talked about how crisis comes from the Greek word crisis, spelled the same way except for a K instead of a C. And how crisis is essentially, it means a time or a decision making, essentially. And how the crisis is a time in which a decision has to be made. So it totally makes sense that at this point where it's on fire, this is the crisis because he can make a choice. He can well, sort of. But he can either wake up
the author makes a choice.
And,
Playwright.
Put himself out or whatever, or put the bed out, or just lay there and immolate.
It's interesting that you make that distinction because it works on two levels here. On one hand, we have the choice given to the characters when a crisis emerges. There are multiple things that the character can do to resolve the crisis. But on a second level, to get all meta about it, it's also a choice that the author, the playwright, right. I should probably say playwright, that the playwright has to make because in order to develop proper conflict and a proper crisis, the playwright must build these choices in. Right. If a playwright works the angles of a story and builds themselves to a point where there is tension but no choices, no options, there is only one path, then I think that would almost neuter the crisis. Now, perhaps previous events could have built towards this inescapable fate if that were the point, that his decisions led up to this eventual end. But I think it's really important to remember as writers that we need to make sure that there are these choices on an authorial level, that we have options. We're giving ourselves options so that the ways in which things play out don't feel railroaded, to use a tabletop role-playing term, where the GM just grabs you by the nose and drags you along a given story path.
And I mean, there are times where, honestly, there is only one outcome of certain events.
Absolutely.
Because that's just logic dictating at that point.
Right, but that's the resolution.
Right.
The resolution is the inescapable inevitability of what happened based on the choices that were made.
Exactly.
So, I think it's very interesting that it's brought this way. And again, we have him constantly referring back to the things we've learned. It's something that makes Egri's chapters really easy to read and understand. Is it doesn't so much seem as every chapter is a new idea, as every chapter takes the previous idea, represents it, and then just takes one additional step forward.
I mean, we are called back to unity of opposites in this. I think we're called back to a couple other things, too.
Yeah, and again, we get a lot of specific details. We get details from Dollhouse. We get details from Ghost,
right,
where we get to see Nora's decisions and the way that they play out. We get to see how the decisions and choices play out to really highlight this conflict.
Right.
So,
I'm actually surprised this didn't just come with a full copy of A Doll's House.
If we went back and read through the excerpts, we could probably put it together.
I think I have read it before, so maybe that's why it just seems so
redundant.
Yeah, but whatever.
Yeah.
It's a classic.
It's never bad to reread those things. And you know what? Maybe we should go through and piece together what we can and fill the rest of it with movie clips from classics such as Jurassic Park, E.T., Pulp Fiction.
The Room.
Yes, we could spin a wonderful narrative about a lost dinosaur from Mars trying to decide whether he should shoot the man in the back of the car. I think that would really, really do a lot of things for our modern media.
I think you could have stopped at do a lot of things, and that would have been accurate.
Yeah.